kind of I started off as just a regular web developer type person. I was always interested in security, but it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago that I really started working on Metasploit and figuring out how exploits worked and things like that. So this is just going to be going over some of the things that my experiences, like tools I use, some of the things I do to like go and find vulnerabilities, and how I write, just start exploiting stuff. So just a brief overview. Some of the tools I use: Burp Suite. Everybody should use Burp Suite. I can't recommend this tool enough. It is awesome. Even $299 for the pro version is totally worth it. Firefox. I use Firefox mainly because it's easier to set up through a proxy. It doesn't have to use the system proxy. It can just go through Burp Suite on its own and not have to go through the OS proxy. SQL Map is super awesome. You set that going through a proxy as it's exploiting something. You can see the SQL queries that it's making, so that you can see how it's reading files off the file system, how it's performing updates, things like that. Super duper useful. You can pass that straight through Burp Suite. Metasploit. I am a frequent Metasploit contributor. I'm going to demo a Metasploit module later today, and I actually made a pull request for that module about 2 hours ago. I can't recommend Metasploit enough either. Everybody should be either know how to use it or contributing to it if you can. And then Linux. Make your OS the IDE. If you can figure out how to pass data from one thing to another to transform it to get it into the state you need it to be on the server side when you're doing a remote command execution, all the better. A lot of people want to ask me where to start. Like, I want to know how to hack web apps, but I don't even know, like, I don't want to go get busted by the feds, you know? That kind of sucks. So where do I start? There's a lot of good stuff. There's vulnhub.com now, which was kind of small when I wrote this presentation, but now it's gotten a lot bigger. These are 3 web apps that I actually really recommend to a lot of people. Bad Store is my favorite. It's a Perl application. It's like on a 10 megabyte ISO that you throw in a VirtualBox or something. And it's got SQL injections, XSS. It's awesome. Damn Vulnerable Web Applications got the OS top 10 on it. And then WebGoat as well is a really popular one. Just go throw them up on a Friday night if you got nothing to do and just hack away. See what you can find, see what you don't find, and then go and look at the PDF documentation and see what you missed. If you're interested in looking at real-world vulnerabilities, watch ExploitDB for easy targets. There's tons of shitty web app or plugins for WordPress and Joomla and things that have SQL injections, you know, open redirects, things like that. So go to Exploit Database. You can't really read it very well, but the top 4, 2 of them are Joomla plugins. So yeah, definitely look for that. Watch Full Disclosure and OSSEC or OSS-SEC mailing lists for people that are dropping vulnerabilities. That's the seclists.org for full disclosure. And then trial virtual appliances. You can just Google enterprise trial virtual appliance, and so many people just give away their software for 30 days for you to just hack on, you know. If you got nothing to do on a weekend, go and download. F5 gives away all sorts of trials. You've got all sorts of fun stuff, and enterprise applications are the worst. Like, these people that we pay to make our enterprises more secure are not doing it very well. And I'll show you why in here in a second. If you have a virtual appliance, watch the machine as it boots. Sometimes it'll be like starting Postgres, starting MySQL, and then you know when if I find a SQL injection, I can tell SQL Map I just want to use the MySQL payloads. It just saves you time, you know. It's just a little bit more information. If you have access to the shell from the virtual appliance, pop shells with known techniques. Use Telnet. See what binaries you have at your disposal. See if you don't have Netcat. See what you can use if you find an RCE and be like, okay, I should be able to use these binaries to make a remote connect back. If you've got blind execs, touch things into /temp, you know. If you can't, if it's got weird IP tables rules or something, and you can't make an egress outbound connection, just touch things onto the file system and then go ls/temp. See if you touched FDSA, you know, things like that. If you have to install, a lot of times you have you set up the virtual machine and you have to configure it, and that first initial configuration requires no authentication, you know, and it's like, set up all your stuff. What's my host name? All sorts of good stuff. Capture those requests as you're doing it, because then you can just replay those requests. A lot of times they don't lock those endpoints down after you've already set up the machine. They just don't show them to you anymore. And so developers are like, but you have to know it's there, you know, and yeah, you do, kind of, sort of. And then if the default account is locked down, sometimes they give you like some account that's like, you log into the shell and it's like some custom shell that's like you press up and down on the menus and things, and you don't actually have a shell at your disposal. Reboot into single user mode. You got root there. And then just play around on the file system, figure out what's available there. Just give you a little idea. You got to put yourself into I kind of approach hacking web apps from an engineer standpoint, not necessarily just from a test all the endpoint or inputs perspective. You know, if you're an overworked software engineer and they don't want the software to be secure, they want it Friday. How am I going to implement changing the host name? You know, it's just system call. You know, it's tech debt at that point. Who cares? Pwn your own. If you're interested in a way a vulnerability works, write your own vulnerable software. Then you know what the code looks like on the back end. You know how it behaves. You know what symptoms come out in the web application whenever you write code that's vulnerable. Then you know it's a lot easier to kind of gauge the logic that's going on in the background. So that's going to be SOAP is a really popular thing. You can write it in C#. The thing that I'm going to demo here is written in C#. It runs on Linux through Mono. It's a popular enterprise technology, and you can easily fuzz WSDLs. WSDLs are XML documents that describe everything about what's going to happen on that endpoint. So here's a demo, I think. No, that's the wrong one. That's the one I want. So let's see, that's vulnerable. That's the one I want. Yes, this is the SOAP service. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little SOAP service here that basically you can list users, create users, things like that based on the WSDL. Let me start it up real quick. Oh, it's already in use. It's already running. Sorry. All right, so I've got a vulnerable handler here, vulnerable.asmx. Right there. So this is what it looks like whenever you have a SOAP service that's listening on a port somewhere. I didn't write any of this UI. This is just what comes default whenever you have like a SOAP endpoint. It shows you the methods that are available. Can you read that? That's like add user, list users, get user. These are just 4 little methods that I wrote that are actually, some of them are vulnerable to SQL injection. So you can do like, you click on the add user, it tells you the input parameters that are required. It's 2 strings, a username and a password. You can do a get user, and that takes just a username. You get a test form that basically what's happening is it parses the WSDL and it just generates this web UI for you. If you go and you append WSDL to the end of these endpoints, you get the XML definition that defines all of the methods that are available. These are all of the parameters that are required, and the ports, and port is a fancy SOAP term for just a different way of accessing that endpoint. So these are, it should be relatively, this is well-defined XML. You should be able to fuzz this with no issues. And so that's what we're going to do. I've got a SQL map has an API now. It's RESTful API. You can actually throw up a SQL map server on another computer and just throw requests at it and say, hey, test this, test this, test this, instead of having to use the command line utility. So I wrote some SQL map bindings in C# that interface with the SQL server. So now my fuzzer, what it'll do is it'll parse the WSDL, try and find any of the, throw apostrophes into any of the parameters, just try and induce any errors that are coming out, parse out syntax error. If syntax error comes back in the response, it throws that request over to SQL map and says, SQL map, test this, show me any injection points that you can exploit. So that should just work. Let's see what happens. Fuzzer.exe. And basically I just pass it. This is the URL to the endpoint. It's going to append the WSDL to the end of the URL inside the binary. So I only pass it that right there. Hopefully, yep. So it sees that I've got a vulnerable service SOAP, add user. It's fuzzing that operation. Possible SQL injection vector and username and password. So it saw that there was a syntax error that came back when it threw an apostrophe into the username and password fields inside of those methods. And so now it sent it over to the SQL map thing. It should actually be running here. Oh, here it is. So you can see SQL map. That's all the output right there. And you can see I was playing with it earlier. But I'm kind of polling it every 10, 15 seconds or so, trying to figure out, there it is, I created a new task. That's all the SQL map output that was automated. So it found a stacked queries injectable one. It's testing another one right here. Like, what my setup at home is I'll have Burp Suite open, and I've got a folder that's shared across my SQL map server and my other computer over NFS. I just drop requests into it, and I've got a little script that watches it and just throws these into SQL map server, so that whenever I find a request that I want SQL map to just test, I just save the file into the NFS share. The server picks it up and just throws it into SQL map to test. This one's going to take just a little bit longer, but this one should find a little bit more. This is the get user, and it's actually susceptible to a SQL injection in the username field, as you can see here. I'll just let that sit for about, shouldn't take too much longer. How many people knew SQL Map had an API? Yeah, it's super fucking awesome. Everybody, if you want to be able to automate, it's great automating inside of an SDLC. You know, just if you have something that ends up coming up with Arachne, for instance. If Arachne finds some sort of Boolean attack, like have Arachne run on it, and once Arachne does it, it'll report you the get parameters and things that it has. You can recreate those requests and stick them into SQL map for automatic exploitation in an SDLC lifecycle. So, oh no, it's on the delete one now. So you can see that on the get user, it found Boolean-based blind, error-based, stacked queries, time. Like this is all automated. Like I'm not having to do anything, and it's just like, hey, I'm popping shells for you right now, you know. So I'm going to go ahead and just quit that because that's kind of boring now. So that's that demo. I'm not going to demo the JSON one right now because I don't have enough time, I don't think. So, but JSON, it's really hot right now. Everybody's using it. It's Ajax. Everybody uses it for Ajax stuff. Definitely a popular replacement for XML. Some people are using a message pack now, and some other ones that are fancy. I know Metasploit uses message pack for their APIs. It's fun to play with when an app is weakly typed. Let's say you've got a JSON stanza that has ID:0, and on a weakly typed application, that's going to be interpreted as an integer on the other side. But if an application is weakly typed, you can throw quotes on it as well. And if it's being dropped into a SQL query on the back end, you're not necessarily, it doesn't care what type it is, right? So if it's an integer inside the JSON, you can change up the type, put quotes on it, and then you can throw SQL into it. SQL map actually does that already. I'm not going to demo that, but I'll show you that here in a second too. Vulns and frameworks are something you should definitely keep in mind. Rails had the YAML exec, you know, we had YAML and XML. You could upload objects that were basically serialized in YAML without authentication and do remote code execution. Vulnerable logic versus vulnerable code. I much prefer starting with source code analysis. That gives me a good idea of how the application's written. You can just read a line of source code for a SQL injection, and you can just know, I know that that's injectable. I just read that. You can go into a Rails controller and be like, it's a post, and they're just dropping the params straight into a SQL query, you know. You can easily grep for common vulnerable things. With black box, you just kind of, you have to use it and kind of think about how it's using the data you're throwing at it. You kind of have to feel it out. But if you can read the source code, then everything seems to like kind of fall together. You know what parts of the application you want to focus on. Common rgreps, just grep for system, eval. Go to rails-sqli.org. They go over all of the active record methods that you can use and which ones do sanitize by default and which ones don't sanitize input by default. And that's super duper useful. Common things to check. Edit anything that lets you edit system settings. Let's say all these enterprise web app appliances, they allow you to, you know, modify the routes for that application, you know, modify the host names, modify all sorts of system settings, and a lot of times they're just dropping those into bash commands that are changing the information on the system. And you can just throw meta character who am I or tilde who am I tilde.example.com, and now your host name's root.example.com, you know. Things like that. Change profile password, mass assignment. Guys don't know how to write change password forms apparently, because I find this all the time. And passing the ID of the user who's having the password changed up with the request for the password change, you know. That I find that so often it's not even funny anymore. APIs are great for fuzzing SQLi, XXE. I wish I had a demo for XXE. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it this time, but Java XML APIs I find almost always are vulnerable to XXE, and especially they're unauthenticated, generally speaking, because you have to authenticate through XML in order to get the get access to the API, and you can just you can DOS it at that point by referencing /dev/random and things like that. And post-auth is okay. Everybody who's a pen tester knows that credentials are some of the easiest things to get on a network. So if you find something that's post-auth, vendors are going to be like, oh, but you need authentication, you know. And I'm like, if you've got Active Directory integration, I'm just going to go pop a domain controller and I'm going to get root on your box. So fuzzing API, SQL map parses and fuzzes JSON requests, and it will actually change up the types like I was saying before. So let's say you've got like ID:0, it'll actually change it to a string and then try and manipulate that as SQL if it's parsing the JSON. So you can have a JSON request sitting on your file system, do SQL map -r request, and it will automatically parse that JSON. It'll parse in every key value pair. It'll try and I'm not sure if it goes through each value in an array, but it definitely does try and do every key value pair. Java XML APIs are notorious for being vulnerable to XXE, and a lot of times you can actually persist data through the APIs that you weren't able to do through the UIs because they try and sanitize the data coming in from the UIs, but they just don't do that for the XML for the APIs. So you can persist data, get XSS, things like that. So this is an ODE that I dropped at ISSW. I gave it to F5 in February. I gave the talk in ISSW in March. They still haven't fixed this yet. So this actually changes your hostname to root.example.com if you have access to the iControl API. iControl is on all of the F5 devices, like all of the things like LTMs, ASMs, the EMs. I'm going to demo it here on a big IP device. It also happens for the big IQ. So they've known about it for almost a year now, and they still haven't fixed it as far as I know. I made a pull request for this module that I'll demo here in just a second, and I'll demo it here. The cool thing about this one is I only have about 64 characters of space, and so I can fit some payloads in that, but I wanted to make a Metasploit module, and Metasploit modules have all sorts of payloads, Perl, Ruby, all sorts of really long stuff. And those are all longer than 64 characters. And so when I wrote it, I basically I make a bunch of requests, and I basically send the payload about 4 or 5 characters at a time, and I echo it into a file in /temp, and then my last request is sh/temp/whatever. And so that's what I'm going to do here. Let's hope this works. It's not failed yet. Sometimes it depends. Like with this one, I was having trouble with that, but it may have been easier to do that on maybe one of the other devices would have had a little bit easier of a time to do it, but with the big IP, it wasn't working out that well. So that one, yep, there we go, yay! So command shell session 1 open. That basically, so it probably made about 15 or 20 requests to get the payload into a file in /temp, and then it called sh/temp/blah blah blah, and then we'll wait for about 1 more second, 2 more seconds, and it should come up with the second new line that says it's ready to type commands in. Yay, root. So root, so that you can have anybody who has access to the F5 iControl API, for instance, basically has root access on any of your F5 boxes. And generally speaking, that is only admins, but you can create users on the F5 devices that only have access to the iControl API, that don't have access to the UI, don't have SSH access. So it's not necessarily you have to be authenticated and you have to be an admin and things like that. That's not always the case. So I also released a brute force module along with that so that you can try and get credentials to run that iControl API exploit as well. So that both of those pull requests are open on the Metasploit pull request queue. So if you find an RC in a web app, start writing a Metasploit module as soon as you can, because you get new insights as you start trying to automate the way the exploit works. You start realizing, oh, I didn't realize that the application requires CSRF or doesn't have any CSRF protections or anything like that. And so now not only do you have RCE, you've got CSRF vulnerabilities that you didn't realize were there. When testing in burp, have a netcat listener up, and then you can just like do a wget. You may not necessarily have a telnet or netcat available, but if you want to be able to get some sort of I know a command ran, have it curl into your netcat, and then you're just going to get a quick get request into your netcat shell, and you know that the command got ran. Sometimes you need to stage. That's what we just did for the F5 thing. You have to write things multiple times. You have to set up the environment before you can actually exploit it. And so sometimes it just requires multiple requests, multiple stages to get finally RCE. I'm using base 64 encryption facetiously, obviously, but it's really easy to get around bad characters if you just base 64 encode stuff. It's lazy, and I know that, but I'm a lazy person, and it's faster. So SQLi, MySQL, and Chmod versus Chion. A lot of tutorials on the internet will be like, hey, if you're having trouble uploading to your /var/www, just chmod 777 the whole thing, and if they've already got access to your box, then you probably, if they can write to it, then you've probably got bigger problems. But that's not true, because if you find a SQL injection and the MySQL user can write to /var/www, they didn't have shell before, but they do now. You know, so knowing when it's chmodded www data or chioned www data versus chmod 777, that's a big distinction, and a lot of people don't realize that. There's tons of tutorials out there that just say 777 the /var/www, and that'll resolve all your problems. And then this is my last slide. HTTP parameters. There was an eBay RCE that happened a few months ago at this point. Maybe it was like 6 months ago. where basically, because the apps were weakly typed, he was able to induce PHP to interpret a variable in the get string as an array instead of actually as an integer or a string. And so you basically do ID open square bracket, close square bracket, and now the PHP app is interpreting that variable as an array of ints or an array of strings instead of just an int or a string. And he was able to make it basically achieve RCE that way because of the way the code was dealing with that variable coming off of the get parameter. RESTful API stuff, you know, sometimes now you've got like example.com/category/1, where that /1 is actually being dropped into a SQL query on the back end, and it's just, you got another SQL injection. It's just not a get parameter anymore or a post parameter. And then your HTTP verbs, like, you know, get, put, post, delete, things. If you do a get on example.com/user/1, what happens if you do a post or a put with that, with the JSON that you got back from the get, but with some different information? Maybe you throw a different key value pair called password in there, and you change the person's password, things like that. So that's basically all I have. Any questions? Nope. All right, cool. Oh yeah. Yeah, so I love Brakeman. Brakeman is such a good static code analyzer. Python doesn't have any real good ones. I mean, Pylint is there. I deal with mostly Rails applications in my job, to be honest, and so I use Brakeman heavily. We actually have that as a part in our SDLC. We have a baseline. We know what Brakeman reports. And we know that some of them aren't going to be fixed anytime soon, but we know the differences between when you do check in new code. We know what the difference is between one run and the one that was right after it, and so we actually use that to figure out what the differences are. Like if anything was introduced, there may still be things that Brakeman's reporting, but we want to know if anything new was introduced since any check-in. So we use Brakeman quite a bit. I love it, and I think that what is it, like President Meat Spin person? I don't know. I can't remember his name, but. Beefcake? Beef something? I can't remember, but President Beef, yeah, whatever. So yeah, I love Brakeman. That's the scanner we use for the most part. And I like Arachne too. Arachne's a really good black box scanner. So you throw up the web application, just point Arachne at it, and it says like no SQL injections, all sorts of really good stuff. Any more? Nope. All right, cool. Thank you.